All right, so what we have here are some little mini versions of one section of the still life. And the section that I'm working on is the brown bottle that you can see, the Hogue bottle, and the little bowl and the ornament. I'm also going to be showing you guys how to work with the fabric today. So we're going to look at two things. We're going to look at how to begin fabric, and we're going to look at how to add compressed charcoal. So who remembers what we said was the big difference between vine charcoal and compressed charcoal? Anybody remember? What's the difference in the two types? What's the difference?
You can't erase compressed charcoal.
Very good. Compressed is not as erasable. In terms of its value, is it darker or lighter or the same?
Darker.
It's much darker. Very good. So we're going to use this last. I have two variations of compressed charcoal that we're going to let you use. The first kind is going to be the one that you begin with, which is the stick compressed charcoal. Okay, it just comes in a little stick, and it's for almost every purpose you need. After we've done most of our drawing, we're going to come in with compressed charcoal that's in a pencil. Students love this because you don't get it on your hands as much, but these are very expensive, so we don't need these until the very end for finish up. So these are just for ending details. Before I get into doing this part, I do want to address how you begin your fabric. Fabric is a section of the still life work that students get really intimidated by. And I want to teach you that it's just like any other section. So what I've done with this particular drawing, I've come in and established some very light grays, and I'm going to do the same thing over here so that you can watch how I did this. And then I'm going to blend this down. The fabric that I'm drawing right now is a very, very light blue. And students very frequently want to almost leave it white. You can't do that. Okay? You have to actually have some value on it. The super white contrast highlights only show up if you have a gray that you're working with to begin with. So I establish a gray first, like this, very light gray. And as I'm looking at the objects in front of me, I see that, hey, in some parts of this fabric, there are areas where there's more gray. It's a darker gray. So I'm going to come in behind the bottle. I can see an area where there's a curve in the fabric where I need to create a darker gray in the fabric. I want you to pay attention to how I am not using line. I did not come in and create linear edges in my drawing. The grays separate themselves. So the darker gray stands out from this gray because it's a different value range. All right? So I'm going to come behind this now and do the one I see here. Can you see already how just with that small addition of charcoal, I've started to create a different shape? Can you see how I'm creating a different shape in here just by the addition of the charcoal? After I have those basic areas added in, and I'm going to do one more in this area, and because I need more control, I'm going to use the tip of my charcoal, but I am going to come in and blend that down so it's a value shift and not a linear shift. And then I'm going to see that, hey, at the very end of this, there's another curve. And I am creating the folds in the fabric. Now the thing to remember when you're doing folds in fabric is that if you have a very strong shadow area in a crease, almost always very close by you're going to have a highlight. So you're going to be dealing constantly with strong highlight and strong shadow. So I'm looking for shadow areas, different grays, and I'm going to come in with an eraser and find some highlight marks on those folds. For example, through here, make that a little darker. so that when I erase, you'll be able to see those eraser marks. So the highlights on this very light fabric look very reflective and shiny. And I'm going to do some over here so you can see it as well. The very top usually gets more light. So usually on fabric, the very top of the fabric will have a strong highlight. You see the way I'm building up the highlight areas in the fabric? Okay. Can you see the highlights over here that I've just erased in? So then I'm going to do a series of building up layers of dark area and highlight as I go. So in this area it's much darker, so I'm going to add in more shadow. And if you lose your highlight, then you will come in and rebuild that up. Now sometimes when you have a fold like this one, it can look flat if you just have one solid highlight line. So what I teach kids to do after you establish your gray is to come in with a pencil eraser. And my pencil has vanished. May I use your pencil eraser? No, the pencil eraser.
This?
Yes.
It doesn't have one.
Does anyone have a pencil eraser? I'll use this then. Pencil erasers work better for this because they have a smaller shape and a smaller point. But what you will do with the pencil eraser is you're going to come in and you're going to let your marks with the eraser follow the form of the fold. So I'm going to regray this in so you can see it again. Can we not beat on the table, please? So I'm going to come in and create a fold effect. By going over. Okay? This is going to be hard to see in a video. You can see it up close. So I'm going to make this darker so all of you can see this if you forget this and you're watching it at home. So if this area is a dark gray or a darker gray, I'm going to come in with my eraser, establish the highlight top first, and then I'm going to use my eraser to follow the form of the fold. So if the fold of the fabric rolls this way, I want my erasure marks to go in the exact same direction. Okay, they should follow that same thing. So it's creating a volume. Can you please hand me that eraser on that table right there on that pencil? Thank you. And the nice thing about using the point of a pencil is that I can draw with it in the same way that I would draw with the tip of the pencil. It's a very valuable tool. I'll do the same thing over here to make this look like it's rounding over so you can see it. And then you can soften that by gentle blending. And I'm going to go over an area in just a moment with some compressed charcoal so it won't fade so much. Are you seeing how that's looking like it's starting to roll over a little bit? Is that making sense to you? It'll make more sense as we work it in a few minutes. So after you've established your basic sections and folds and where the highlights are going to be in your fabric, and you come in and used an eraser to create those rolls that go over the volume, and you feel like you've worked it as much as you can with your vine charcoal, then we're going to come in and do some work with our compressed. And you can see very easily how the pencil eraser gives you much more control of where you're erasing. Okay? And you can press harder to get a stronger highlight. So now what I'm going to do is come in and add some compressed charcoal on other areas to really give us a strong sense of contrast and help establish where the shadows are going to fall on our objects. I'm going to start on an area that's probably easier, which is the bottle. When I look at that, I can totally tell that the very bottom part has darker shadows, and I can also see that there's some very strong highlights or white areas on the bottle. So I'm going to come in first and establish some dark contrast. Remember from our demonstration when we did spheres and shading on those, I taught you that if you put vine charcoal on top of the compressed, it makes it blend a little easier. And you can see the difference immediately in the glass. You can also use your finger to pick up some of that compressed powder and pull it into other sections of, like the bottle, for example, there where you don't need it as dark, but you want to make a darker gray. So I can come in and I'm looking at what areas does this look darker and what areas does it just look slightly darker. So I guess significantly darker versus slightly darker. And then don't forget, we have not started erasing yet. So we're going to do some erasure to show the highlight and reflection. Placing the vine on top of the compressed for blending. And I'm looking at where I see lights and darks. It's not a solid area. When I look at their variations. And so I'm trying to replicate what's in front of me. Then what I'm going to do is take my pencil and I'm going to come in and I'm going to find where are my highlights. And then I can soften it. I'll have to use a finger that doesn't have as much charcoal on it. Are you seeing what I'm doing here? And I'm by no means finished, but we don't have all hour, so I'm going to just show you the start of this. Does that make sense to everybody? Okay? So taking a look at some things that you can do with the pencil that are a little different. With the pencil compressed charcoal, I can come in and really define very nicely the edges and make this look completely clean. So I can come in and clean up and sharpen edges with this in a way that I can't do with the stick. This paired up with an eraser can really help define edges beautifully in your drawing. You see how, now I've exaggerated so you can see that, but you see how we can really sharpen edges with the eraser and with the compressed charcoal? Does everybody see that? Now I'm going to not, and I don't have a grape here, but I do want to show you because a lot of you have grapes in your section. I'm going to work on this sphere here as an example of how to approach a grape. You look at it the same way that we did your spheres that we practiced with in the beginning. You find out where's the darkest shadow on it, your core shadow. And you'll have to shade the little grapes individually. The grapes that are on the far side are kind of, they almost look black, they're so purple. So they're going to have a lot of serious shading on them, whereas the lighter grapes, those kind of greenish ones, you're going to have more grays that you're creating. Then we're going to come in and erase our reflected light and highlight on these. You see how that will very quickly make it start to look more three-dimensional and rounded? Does that make sense? Can everybody see that? All right, so I'm going to take one area of the fabric and make it a little darker for the people who are doing green fabric, because that's slightly different. I'm going to make my grays a little darker in the area here, not too much compressed. But if you're doing that green fabric, if you just use the vine, all of your shading will vanish when you blend it. So the green fabric needs a darker gray base to start with. On the area where you're going to have the very top fold, try not to put too much of the compressed, because remember, it does not erase very well. You guys are being so good. I'm almost done. I'm going to let you draw. So this is what the green fabric would look like before you do erasing. Okay, does that make sense to you, how it's darker? So the grays would be darker. And then to create that rounded effect, to make it look like the folds are going over, we'll come in with our eraser, find your highlight, and round it over. Keep your eraser clean. And these feather marks you can fade with your finger. This makes it look like the fabric roll goes over. And then gently fade it so it's not so extreme. And this is how all of the level 1 students, the examples you see on the board, how they did their fabric. Can you see how that looks like it's starting to roll over? You guys understand? All right, so what you're going to be doing now, I'm giving you permission, after you get your grays, to start using the compressed. So I want you to try and start on that today. All right? Thanks.